A 1999 U.S. Department of Justice study concluded that mothers were responsible for a higher share of children killed during infancy between 1976 and 1997 in the United States, while fathers were more likely to have been responsible for the murders of children aged 8 or older. Parents were responsible for 61% of child murders under the age of 5. Sometimes, there is a combination of murder and suicide in filicide cases. On average, according to FBI statistics, 450 children are murdered by their parents each year in the United States. In 2013, in the United States, homicide was in the top 5 causes of deaths of children, and in the top 3 causes of death in children between 1 and 4 years old. A direct correlation has been identified between child abuse rates and child homicide rates. Research suggests that children murdered by their parents were physically abused by them prior to their death. One of such parent was Travis James Mullis. Travis was born on September 20, 1986. After the age of 4, Travis James Mullis often received psychiatric treatment for several psychological problems, including suicidal and homicidal behavior. Mullis reportedly had symptoms of hearing voices and getting flashbacks of his childhood sexual abuse whenever he molested others. Mullis was orphaned at about 10 months old when his mother died, his father having abandoned the family shortly after his birth. Due to this, Mullis was adopted by his uncle and aunt, Gary and Ann Mullis, who became his foster parents, and he grew up in Abingdon, Maryland. Gary Mullis sexually abused the boy for 3 years, until he was 6. Gary was convicted and incarcerated for molestation. The abused turned to be the abuser. When he was 13, Mullis was caught for molesting his 8-year-old cousin, and he was thus sent to the Jefferson School in Maryland, a school for emotionally troubled juveniles. Mullis spent 4 years at the juvenile school before he was released at 17. Mullis later moved to Texas when he was 18, and he later lived with his girlfriend, with whom he had a son, Elijah James Mullis, who was born on October 29, 2007. Travis James Mullis, then 21 years old, drove his car with his 3-month-old son Elijah on January 29, 2008. In the backseat after he argued with his girlfriend, Karen Koberger. Elijah, his son, was at the backseat after attempting to sexually assault a friend's 8-year-old daughter. When he parked his car at Galveston, Travis James Mullis assaulted his son sexually. When the baby Elijah cried, Mullis strangled the infant, followed by stomping on his head several times, crushing his skull and leading to his death. Travis James Mullis killed his son Elijah. After the killing, Mullis disposed of the body of his son by throwing it at the roadside around Sowell Boulevard. Elijah's body was subsequently discovered by a married couple. Travis James Mullis, after murdering Elijah, Mullis fled Texas and went on the run for 3 days, and a warrant of arrest was issued for Mullis. The police knew his history of molesting young children, and wanted to question him on the death of his child. 3 days after he fled out of Texas, on February 1, 2008, Mullis surrendered himself to the police in Philadelphia, where he confessed to the murder. Travis James Mullis was extradited back to Texas, where he was charged with the murder of his son. Mullis's girlfriend was arrested in New York in February 2008, and charged with child endangerment for entrusting Elijah to the care of Mullis despite her knowledge of Mullis's psychiatric condition, and that Mullis might hurt her child. Travis James Mullis sticks to his confession and admits his guilt in the killing of his own son. On March 7, 2011, Travis Mullis stood trial before a Brazoria County jury for the murder of Elijah Mullis. During the trial itself, the videotape confession of Mullis was played out. During his questioning by police, Mullis confessed to killing Elijah due to his incessant cries, stating that it was the only way for his son to stop crying. And he told police that he was remorseful for the death of Elijah. At trial, Mullis' attorneys focused on his history of mental illness stemming from a difficult, abusive childhood. His father abandoned his family shortly after his birth, which was marred by a life-threatening illness with a mortality rate as high as 50% in newborns. The prosecution, at trial, focused on Mullis' history of violence and argued that the threat he posed could not be mitigated by treatment or incarceration. And Mullis' written and videotaped confession of killing his son, according to court documents, provided nearly indefensible grounds for conviction. Some acts are such egregious violations of not only the law, but of civilized standards, that society's only appropriate response is to impose the ultimate penalty on the wrongdoer. The jury took 1 hour of deliberation before they reached their verdict, finding Mullis guilty of murdering his son, on March 11, 2011. In the years since his conviction, Mullis changed his mind repeatedly on whether to appeal his death sentence in state and federal courts. He abandoned all appeals within months of his conviction, after a court-appointed doctor found him competent to do so. "I have always admitted guilt. Justice is deserved for the victims' families," Mullis wrote in a September 13, 2012, letter to the court waiving his appeals. "It is in the best interests of justice for the victims' families for this appeal to stop here and execution of this sentence to be carried out in a timely manner." But over the course of the next decade, Mullis reinstated and revoked his appeals several more times, saying he had lied during his competency evaluation and was motivated to give up his appeals by mental illness, suicidal thoughts and an irrational fear of spending the rest of his life in prison. Mullis' attorneys argued that he was mentally ill and should not be executed. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction in 2012. Mullis filed an appeal in federal court in July 2013, arguing that he had had deficient representation at trial and alleging that the state had presented false evidence of extraneous offenses he had committed in his youth. A federal district court judge dismissed his petition in 2021, saying he had given up his rights to appeal, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed that decision last year. On May 23, 2024, Mullis's death warrant was issued, which scheduled his execution to take place on September 24, 2024, which was 4 days after his 38th birthday. During the final months leading up to his tentative execution date, Mullis did not appeal to stay his execution or file for clemency to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. On September 24, 2024, Mullis was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville Unit. In his last words, he thanked prison officials and staff for changes made across the system that allowed rehabilitation to be possible for even the condemned. And he apologized to his son's mother and her family, stating he regretted causing the death of Elijah and had no regrets for welcoming death and giving up his appeals against the death penalty. Mullis was pronounced dead at 7:01 p.m. after a single dose of pentobarbital was administered to him. Mullis was the 4th inmate put to death in 2024 in Texas. He was 38 years old at the time of his execution. Thank you for watching Death Row.